Tass in Baltimore right now. We'll be broadcasting from Toronto all next week and waiting for the Wizards as well. But the Orioles making a quick pit stop at Fenway Park for a couple games. We'll see him again at the end of next week. We see this guy a couple times a year, even back to when he was covering the Houston Astros, deep in the heart of Texas. He's up in Boston now, covering all things Red Sox as the Red Sox Insider. It's CSNNE. There's a lot of alphabet going on there. He is Evan Drellich. You can follow him out on Twitter at Evan Drellich. That's DRELLICH. And tens of thousands do. They haven't given you the flu yet, right? I haven't had any of the actual beat writers on yet, but are you a little concerned about Montezuma at this point?
John Farrell was joking about SARS. I wasn't in Detroit, and I like traveling. I like being on the road, but you know what? This is probably a decent series to miss.
Right, and a lot of guys did miss it. I told Shaughnessy, I think it's the curse of Mitch Moreland at this point. I mean, this has been a crazy period, right? I mean, for the Red Sox, not just bereavement, and now you got a Bradley injury, and on top of that, this flu thing. This is not the way it was drawn up by Dombrowski when you're peddling off Price and giving a whole bunch of money to Sale and moving Moncada out, right? This wasn't in the game plan.
Well, Sale's been the one thing that's kind of gone to plan. Yeah, everything else has been so screwy. It's kind of hard to feel bad about the fact the Red Sox have lost a couple close games here. I mean, they very easily could have a couple more wins. I think it shows you, like, a year from now, let's fast forward, I'm going to point to this as the reason why we should not care nearly as much as we do. We've got nothing else to care about. About the opening day roster, right? Everybody, who's going to get
over?
The 25th? Yeah. I mean, within 3 days, it's totally blown up, So it's just kind of funny from that perspective of how much just a week things can change.
Well, look, man, I've been doing this 25 years, and I've been a baseball fan for 40, but literally this is my 26th opening day, going back to 92 when Camden Yards opened, on the radio. And, it's been sort of a constant thing, and there's always spring training, and they used to go to Fort Lauderdale. Now they go to Sarasota. And, man, we spent incredible amount of time back in the 90s about which guy was really going to come north or say. That's all over with throughout baseball. And certainly, Buck Showalter uses the Norfolk train like a shuttle. And this 10-day disabled list now is going to change
that. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't about 24. This is about 35 or 40 guys for most teams.
Yeah, and starting pitching is the area where that's almost getting more. It's the bullpen as well, but people think about a 5-man rotation, and I think I just don't remember in baseball the conversation being about, well, who's your 6th starter, who's your 7th starter, who's your 8th starter. But the reality is you need those guys. You need to have, usually teams use, I'm saying usually, a couple teams I looked at, for example, like last year's Cubs, the 2013 Red Sox, I believe last year's Red Sox, it's always like 10 or 11 is the number. And a couple of those guys might just make one start. But you absolutely need to have a few guys, and ideally guys with options, so that you can bring them up, send them back down, and you don't have to risk losing them, right? Like the Red Sox have a guy named Kyle Kendrick, who I'm sure is familiar down there because he was with the Phillies for so long. But he had a good spring training. He was encouraging, but you can't bring him up unless you're sure he's going to stick around a little bit, because then you'd have to expose him to waivers, and then you might lose him. So the rotation depth is kind of like this. It's a more complicated subject than you would think it would be for just you're talking about backup starting pitchers, but it's just not that simple.
Well, and it's not that simple when it comes to the bullpen either. And if you don't have a 4th or 5th starter, and I know you've seen Wade Miley's work, Evan, then you're concerned about, who's going to pitch on Thursday and Friday. And more than that, we've seen O'Day blow a game over the weekend. And, I don't want to say the bullpen's taxed already. But, there's a very, very thin line, a thin margin for every team, even for the Red Sox to spend all this money. When the Orioles lose a Tillman, or when the Red Sox lose a Price, or when the Blue Jays lose a Donaldson, it's a BFD. I mean, for all these teams, because they just don't have somebody down in Pawtucket they can roll in when your $200 million pitcher's not there.
Right. It's one of those things I think every team kind of talks about in the bubble. Well, if we lose this guy, we're screwed. Yeah, well, you know what? If everybody loses that guy, you're screwed. And it's just, there are some teams that are better set up to absorb things. I mean, there's no denying that. But when it comes to those mega players, I mean, in some respect, the Red Sox were actually kind of well set up to absorb the loss of David Price, simply by virtue of the fact that you had a second pitcher who is of the highest caliber in Chris Sale. But the rest of the rotation takes the hit. So when it comes to those big name guys, there's nothing you can. There's no insurance plan you can reasonably have.
Well, the part of the insurance plan is having a whole bunch of young players. And when a Bradley goes down, or when there's a
good
flu
farm
epidemic,
system. Yeah.
Well, I mean, everybody says that. And in the case of the Orioles, back when McPhail was running the show here and he was dealing off for Adam Jones and Tillman and these guys, he was always, well, we're going to grow the arms and we're going to buy the bats. The Red Sox have grown the bats and they buy the arms. It's the exact opposite of what the game plan would be. But as long as you're growing something that is productive, and I guess in the Orioles case, it's Gausman and Bundy, right? But for the Red Sox, this group of killer bees, and Benintendi's the newest one into this with that Fred Lynn swing, that's the reason to love the Red Sox. But missing Ortiz, that to me is a red flag for any organization when you lose a generational player and say, well, we're just going to replace him with a 21-year-old.
Yeah, well, the reason they could get away with it was because you can argue that the pitching production of Chris Sale is somewhat equivalent to the hitting production of Ortiz, and you say, well, doesn't it hurt the offense? Yes, of course it hurts the offense, but the fact that the offense was the best in baseball last year is the way you kind of comfort yourself and say, okay, what team would be better positioned to absorb the loss of David Ortiz? And the Red Sox probably are at the top of that list. Now, that doesn't mean you can't lull yourself into a false sense of security, and I think to some degree that might have happened, although Mitch Moreland's looked good. I mean, Mitch Moreland's not going to be David Ortiz. He looked bad for the first couple games, and then he really turned it on. It was an interesting trade-off in my mind, for in no small part because hitting is just kind of more reliable in terms of health, right? I guess with Ortiz, you're always worried about the heels going, but all things being equal, what's the more reliable value? Is it pitching or hitting? And I'm inclined to say hitting. You're just not as scared that at any single moment something can go. But look, guys rounding first base, Jackie Bradley Jr., he's going on the disabled list with something that looks relatively minor. But so maybe I'm overstating this position, but it's just the way I sometimes think about it.
He is Evan Drellich. He covers all things Red Sox for CSN New England. You can follow his journey out at Evan Drellich on Twitter. That's DRELLICH. Now, you take this gig, right? You're down in Houston. I know you're a New Yorker, and you've covered baseball, and you're on that journey that I wanted to be on when I was a young guy like you, which was, being the baseball beat guy. Angelos took my press pass 11 years ago. The one thing I don't have to do is go there and hang out till 2 o'clock in the morning in a rain delay anymore. I get to do that at home with, beer and my cat and hockey games and a remote control at this point. But you take a gig to go cover the Boston Red Sox, you kind of expect to cover a World Series, don't you? I mean, that's not your arrogance. That's the arrogance of, well, they'll figure it out. They'll throw enough money at it. We don't have that around here. No one takes the job at the Baltimore Sun anymore covering the Orioles thinking, well, if I'm there 5 years, we'll be in a World Series. I mean, I know for you professionally, you love baseball, but part of the Boston thing is they're going to compete. They're going to compete hard, and that's what's expected in that market of all the teams.
Yeah, I think that you're kind of getting to a byproduct of what brought me here, which was realistically more professional opportunity. And the fact that I have since switched jobs in Boston from the Herald to Comcast, it kind of shows that. And the reason that the teams are competitive here is because it's the same reason that you have these media options and these different outlets. It's all about the fan fervor that exists here, right? That's what's driving everything. It's just a passionate town. And
well,
so
they don't accept this crap of the offseason. We're not going to try. I mean, the Orioles have done that. Several of the offseason, many for 25 years. No one really believes the Orioles are going to win the World Series this year. I mean, you have to be pretty myopic to believe that. But, in Boston, if it's not this year, they'll reload again, right? I mean, that's part of – there aren't many places you can go and say that, right?
There's no arguing that it's good to be a Boston sports fan right now. And last, what's the count of titles up to? I don't know. But
Too many.
Going back to that Pats title in I guess it would have been 2001, right? It's title town, right? Would anybody actually argue that? I don't think so.
Well, I don't think you can. I mean, look, the Celtics are going to be a 1 seed. Nobody's even giving them a chance. It's crazy. But the Red
Right.
Sox,
Well, the Cavs lit them up the other day. But,
well, this
I understand it.
yeah, this part for the Red Sox though, with the young talent coming in and the pitching, this is as good of an off season now, especially with Panda coming back and at least being somewhat capable of earning some of the money there. And I know Farrell's kind of bullish on Price being able to get back maybe sooner than later, from what we understood from the Tuesday press conference. That this team has the expectations of 95 or bust, right? I mean, they got to win a lot of ball games this summer to sort of justify the hype that went on in the offseason for them.
Well, they definitely need to make the playoffs. I don't think there's any way they actually are a better team than last year's team. I look around the East and I don't really see an improved team. I actually think the Orioles could be slightly better. The Yankees could be slightly better, but I think the Red Sox and Blue Jays are both weakened. But they do have to get back to the playoffs. That much is clear. And I think they're positioned to. And if they're not a 93-win team, a 93-win season is not easy to repeat. I think that gets overlooked is how good that team ended up being last year. They had a very late run, separated themselves a little bit, kind of took care of business with the Blue Jays and the Yankees too. Actually, the Yankees made a late surge. But 93 wins. It's not like we're getting to a point in baseball where like 90 wins is that's hard to do. I think they're going to be right there. And to me, the big factor is Price. Okay, you lose Ortiz, you add Sale. Well, so then what's kind of the other major factor at play here? It's whether David Price is there or not.
Well, and thoughts for us is the same thing with Tillman. I mean, if they have Tillman, a real Tillman, I would believe in it. I don't see that right now, and it's got to be disconcerting for the Orioles as well to have gone to first day of spring training, your guy's not ready, opening day, your guy's not ready, and he didn't look right last August and September. The two words you never want to hear are James and Andrews, right?
Well, and that's what happened with. It's kind of amazing that Price, is they're optimistic about him now, and this is after sending him off not only to see Andrews, but to see Elitrash, and sending him off to the NFL Combine to do it. When you hear that set of events unfolding, the fact that he came back with anything but you're going for Tommy John tomorrow diagnosis, that's actually kind of incredible. And if he really is able to come back, and there's reason to be somewhat skeptical of that right now, it's almost even more incredible.
Rest of the division, Evan, I think the Yankees are reloaded. We saw them come through here last week, and obviously the Sanchez thing, and even the Donaldson thing in Toronto. None of these teams have had a particularly strong trip through the first week.
No, and it's kind of what I was saying before. I don't think the division in any way has gotten better. I do think the Yankees are worth watching. How quick can this youth movement kind of build up? I do believe that there's significant talent there. It's actually really impressive how Brian Cashman was able to rebuild them as quickly as he has. The Blue Jays to me are probably, when I think back to last year, it kind of lines up the same. The Blue Jays have better pitching than the Orioles. The Blue Jays still have good hitting. The Orioles still seem to be kind of one-dimensional. The difference is now, okay, maybe some of the young pitching can step up. But I don't look at the division in any way as like drastically different compared to last year's setup. The Rays look like they're dead in the water.
Well, I mean, the Red Sox for the offseason and the ascending players. I mean, I don't know if we know where the ceiling is for Betts or for Bogarts, who's back in the lineup, and Bradley if he gets off this 10-day DL. And certainly for Benintendi, that whole Boston thing, that fresh start, that young guy thing, it's a lot easier for these young guys to come up through the system, I think, than it is for a Chris Sale or a David Price to take a check from another organization. It always feels bigger for the players that are imported than it does for the kids. The kids seem like they do okay.
You're talking about the handling of pressure?
Sure.
Yeah, there is something to be said for coming up within the system, but at the same time, the Red Sox haven't been able to develop any pitching, and the Yankees have had trouble with that too. I was talking to a scout with another organization recently, and they were saying, the big curiosity is the Mets. They seem to be able to pump out these guys who not only make it and are good, but get better in the big leagues. And it's kind of that's the player development question right now is how do you actually develop pitching? And it might really be the case that there's no one good answer, but it does feel like teams like the Cubs, the Red Sox, they figured out the position player side of it. I think there's some luck involved here. Okay, the fact that you get all position players working out great for the Red Sox and no pitchers, I don't think it's entirely, about some sort of incredible strength on the position player side and some incredible weakness on the pitching side. But you also can't discount it either. You can't just look at it and go, oh yeah, that's no big deal. That's just random. There's probably something more at play there.
Evan, always great having you on, man. Enjoy the baseball this week. I know it's a short series up there. You guys get down to Camden Yards next week. No tourist crab cakes for you around here. We'll send everybody out to CSNNE as well as up to your Twitter. I know you're doing some radio up there at EEI as well. Rest up, man. It's going to be a long journey here for you guys. Red Sox figure to be in this thing for the next 6 months.
Hey, Nestor, thank you as always. Hope to talk to you soon.
You got it. Evan Drellich at Drellich. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as at CSN up in New England. He's covering the Red Sox. Everybody's covering the Red Sox this week. We got a short series, then off to Toronto. Of course, the Caps taking on the Maple Leafs on Thursday and Saturday, and we will be up in Toronto next week for games 3 and 4. I'll be broadcasting from north of the border and using my my passport for something other than, a placeholder in my binder. Nasty at WNST.net finds me out on Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And don't forget, you can stream anything we have here through the buyatoyota.com audio vault and our Listen Live button. You can download the TuneIn Radio app. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Last but never least, the morning newspaper, 7 a.m. It reaches your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Don't forget about our London trip, and we're awaiting the Ravens' NFL schedule for this year. We're playing in Green Bay, playing in Nashville, playing in Minnesota, playing in Oakland. We'll be having those trips on sale at some point next week as well. We've taken over 18,000 WNST and Baltimore sports fans on the road. We're hoping to take you guys on the road with us with the Ravens. If you want to go on the London trip, we do have the $100 off deal. All you have to do is toss me an email. I'm Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.